Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of the Untitled podcast. I'm Arvind, your co-host, a partner at Judas Capital.
And I'm Vignesh, a partner at Sierra Ventures. And for this episode, we have a former Sierra founder, Varun Badhwar, who was an incredible founder, and we had a great journey with. We're excited to have him here today to have him walk us through his story of how he ended up joining startups and how he ended up at his current company, Endor. With that, Varun, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to the discussion.
You know, this podcast, as we call it, is for operators, by operators, and I think there's no good advice for operators without starting with the story. And so, Varun, maybe we can start with your story, how you ended up at CipherCloud first, and now how you ended up at Endor.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I did my undergrad in computer science at USC, and I was a horrible software engineer. Like, I love being in the business side of technology, but I kind of struggled my way through kind of coding classes, which is like, I mean, you're doing CS, you got to be good at that. And, you know, as most of the career fairs were beginning and everybody was interviewing for classic software engineering jobs at Cisco and here and there, I just couldn't stand it. Like, I knew that was not for me. But the problem was, like, what do you do that's in the business side of technology? And like right when this was going on, I ended up taking an elective course in ethical hacking. And that was like the best thing in my 4 years in college because, you know, you could actually break into stuff and not go to jail. And, you know, you're learning like cool, geeky stuff, but it's always like impactful more as a outside in like tester and consultant doing these types of things. And so I was like, perfect, let's go find a job in cybersecurity. But there was a problem back in 2006. Nobody wanted to hire, you know, straight out of college for cybersecurity jobs. Like, you typically came in through IT and systems engineering background. But I had two consulting offers from KPMG and Deloitte, and I kind of put them against each other to say, you know, I'll join whoever lets me get into the cybersecurity practice. And long story short, I ended up at KPMG. I was there for a couple of years. Salesforce ended up being one of my first kind of clients that I was doing some cybersecurity work for as a consultant, and ended up joining them full time back when there were 1,500 employees. I was there for about 4 years and really got to experience what cloud security really was before anybody was thinking about this. And then in 2010, there was another crossroads. I was like, you know, okay, this is kind of getting boring. Let's go to business school, because that's what everybody does when they want to change careers. And right when I was getting ready to kind of quit my job and go there, I had an opportunity to start CipherCloud with another kind of serial entrepreneur who had an idea to do something in cloud security, but didn't know what. And obviously I'd been doing it for 4 years. And that began a journey to build products for what later came to be known as the CASB market. But CipherCloud was the first CASB ever in the space. And I did that for about 5 years. Look, back in 2011 with CipherCloud, we raised a $30 million Series A round, which is unheard of. And, you know, we had great success. But there's a lot of learnings out of building CipherCloud, good and bad. And, you know, 5 years later, I said I was ready to get in the driver's seat and start building my own thing where I was CEO and kind of ultimate decision maker, and started Redlock, because just like apps were moving from kind of on-prem to cloud, now data center workloads were moving to the cloud, and people knew very little about security. So built Redlock. You know, we had an amazing run there, 0 to exit in 3 years on the dot. And, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about that some more. And then spent about 3 years at Palo Alto Networks building Prisma Cloud from 0 to 300 million ARR. That was another heck of a journey. Along that time, SolarWinds happened. And, you know, my board was asking me a lot of questions around supply chain security. And I realized as an industry, we had not paid attention to that. We couldn't even consistently answer what software supply chain security meant. And so long story short, that ended kind of becoming my next calling is starting Endor Labs in 2021. And been at it now for 2.5 years and having a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I appreciate the context and the background. I think that's a great summary of your journey to how you got here. I want to touch on a couple of things in your journey. Maybe first things first. You talked about leaving CipherCloud to go start your own company, and now that you've started 2 companies, I think you probably have a good perspective on this. But, you know, I think for a lot of early stage founders, and especially first time founders, I think developing a really good point of view that's like rock solid from a customer discovery and validation perspective is hard. And maybe you can just walk us through your journey, especially at Redlock, of how you got to the point where you're like, yep, I have an idea that I want to go after. And you were really convinced about the size of the opportunity that you were going after.
Yeah, look, the first thing I always counsel people that come to me saying, I want to start a company, I'm not sure. I'm like, you know what? If you have an opportunity to work beside somebody who's done a lot of the startup-y stuff, and you can be a co-founder to them, but you don't have all the pressure of fundraising and figuring out how to get design partner customers and advisors and build a product, then go do that. Because I think there was so much learning in the Cypher Cloud journey with Praveen being the founder CEO who had built ArcSight and Agilance before that. Is he was taking care of funding and other things, and I was there watching it, but that pressure wasn't on me. And my job was to build the best freaking product for that category. I'd say like now shortcut to, 5 years later, now I'm building Redlock. A lot of that was just, I'd seen it. I'd seen it work. I'd seen what worked and I'd seen what didn't work. And so I think the first focus to me, I tell everybody, and there's no rocket science here, is go talk to as many people as possible, right? One kind of philosophical belief I have, like there's a lot of people that say, I'm working on something, but I can't tell you what it is. It's secret, it's stealth. And I usually say, like, that's a problem, because you got to be able to go take this idea out there to the universe, see what kind of feedback you get, the good, the bad, the ugly, and just internalize all of that, right? The more you build in a cave, the less likely you are to get it right on the first shot. Now, on the flip side, I said, if somebody can take your idea in this discovery process and out execute you, then shame on you and good for them, because they just did better than you. And so, look, that's been a core belief for me. The funny thing, though, Vignesh, is, I probably had 24, 25 VCs reject me before Sierra came and said, yes, we'll do it, the seed. And, I was pretty dejected in that process, just going up and down Sand Hill. But during that time, while that was happening, I used that delay to get more and more customer validation, conversations, whiteboarding. And I think in that process, it made me a lot better and articulate in my pitch in what we were trying to achieve, what was the value proposition, what was going to be the value to the customer. But in that time, I developed more relationships with people who could then have a conversation with you and Mark at Sierra and say, look, this is what they're building. This is why it's important. So, while it's not everything is rosy in the journey, use that time you're getting, because things are not going your way, to your advantage wherever possible. And I think that was a big thing for me. But yeah, look, it's the basics, right? Go have the most number of conversations. Don't hide the idea under a rug. Talk about it. Rejection is part of the journey. It'll be okay. It'll make you develop thick skin, because you know what? That's still probably the easiest part of company building. It's going to get a lot harder. So I think those were some of the key things up front.
Yeah, I think that the comment around resiliency and the consistent learning, I think, is a really, really interesting point. Maybe one other question, I guess, as it relates to company building, and I want to go through a couple of different journeys. And obviously, we had some of the context around Cypher Cloud and how you've even approached Endor. But do you feel that how hard that first fundraise was, how capital efficient you needed to be? I'm curious about how you think about the being constrained in the early days impacts your ability to operate and run a really good company.
Yeah, look, this was some of the learnings we had between like Cypher Cloud and Redlock. With Cypher Cloud, a lot of our initial engineering team, actually all of it was in India, and a lot of it was juniors, kind of freshers out of college. And I'd seen some of the fallacies of that came to haunt us in the longer term. And so, look, our seed was $2.5 million at Redlock. It wasn't large, but the thing that was super important to me is to hire the best people for kind of engineering, architecture, data science early, make that investment, even if that meant I had to cut back on, like, we never had operations for the longest time. Like, I was the janitor, I was the HR, I was everything, because you got to make trade-offs. If I want to overinvest in a certain area, I'm going to be scrappy in other areas. And at the same time, we did leverage our learnings of having a, development center in India to our advantage, but we designed it where we were co-developing the India engineering organization with the US kind of core architecture to kind of make sure we're thinking about scale early, making sure we're thinking about the right paradigms and the foundational decisions we make. Because as much as people will tell you, be small, be scrappy, MVP, and then you can rework things, it's a balance. Like you have to be scrappy, but in a startup, if you start doing well, it's very hard to find time to go back and redo things. And like the question that a lot of people ask me is, how did Palo Alto Networks go from Redlock's platform to 300 million ARRs on that platform in 3 years? And we'll talk about that. But it's because we invested in strong foundations up front. So there's no science to this. It's a bit of art, but raise enough money so you have the right caliber of talent, because while you don't want a long-term presumption of success and just build the best thing that nobody uses, but you want enough of a strong foundation that if you build a multi-story building on it, it doesn't collapse.
Got it. I think that's a really good segue maybe into one of the other topics, which really is around hiring. And I know from my conversations with my partner, Mark, he always raves about your ability of hiring in the early days. And maybe you can start with kind of first things first. If you have a framework, I mean, when you talk about, hiring good people, I think for some of the very early, like the first time founders and even sometimes second time founders, a lot of times they may not know what great looks like. And I'm curious how you figured that out as as a semi first time founder. Like what made somebody special? Like what really drew you to to the people that you brought on to Redlock in the early days?
Yeah, look, if you talk to 50 people, you'll kind of start in your head compartmentalizing people and like, hey, these were the great people I had conversations with. These were the dull conversations, or these were the arrogant, egotistical people, and these were the humble, hungry people. I optimized, right or wrong, for humble and hungry, the two H's. And for me, it was, look, if somebody's kind of done the same thing 5 times over and they're going to come back and do it the 6th time, there's a possibility they're going to be overconfident, possibly complacent, and definitely egotistical. I optimized for finding people that had proven themselves as a second in command, and they really were fired up for an opportunity to be first in command, lead a function, and scale up. So if you look back, most of my hires fell in that category. My VP of sales fell in that category. My VP of marketing, to a great degree, fell in that category. So I think all of that really was just looking for the snacks, right? Hungry, humble, and obviously having domain knowledge is incredible because that reduces the ramp time for somebody. But when you're doing something as new as cloud security back in 2016, yeah, like you might have adjacencies. For example, my VP of sales, Brandon Conley, he came from having been at Netscope for several years. So he understood the cloud security market, a different aspect of it than what Redlock was doing, but it was valuable. So I think those are the things that are really, really important to me. I'm very particular when I'm hiring the first set of functional leaders. Like a lot of my time is spent to say, are they ready to roll up their sleeves and play player coach? Because if the first thing you're going to come in and do is tell me, here's the 3 people I need to then hire to then get to work, that's a problem. So I always say, like, I need you to get to work first, learn things, and then go hire the kind of people that will fit the criteria of what you have just learned in the past 3 months that we need to go on and do scale. So I think those are some of the key tenets for me.
I've maybe one follow-up for you on the hiring front, because you touched on a couple things here, right? I mean, obviously for your very first few employees and the first few folks that you want to bring on, I think that humble and hungry kind of mentality is really, really important, because we all know the early journey around startups is really hard, and you need people that have that. But then you also kind of threw in this nugget about, hey, Brandon came from Netscope, had some industry background, and so as you think about hiring execs versus hiring your first few employees, does the lens with how you actually think about that person change? Like, does the level of expertise and experience in a given category, like having done this before, like, does it change when you hire execs versus hiring your first early employees?
I mean, it depends, right? What are you hiring for? As an early employee, if you're hiring for like a lead engineer who's going to be an IC, but really like important in their domain, then yes, right? Like that's what you're hiring for. So what are you optimizing for, right? Like, are you looking for the first salesperson to actually go close deals, but you're calling them ahead of sales? That's also problematic. So I have a concern generally with like just title bloat, title inflation, because a lot of people do that. It's like, oh, you've never run sales before, but I'll give you a head of sales role and come do that. I always tell people like, look, let's say you're coming in and you're coming in as a first account executive in my company. I'll give you first dibs. As you grow, you prove yourself, both your maturity and ability to sell, but also to lead. If you're there, I'll give you first dibs because I have no reason to go outside and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in retained searches to go find somebody else from outside. If you are capable and can show me that you can grow with us. And you know what? There are great people that are just very good at what they do, but as individual contributors, there are great people that will grow with you in your organization for 5 years, or there's great people that will grow with you for 2 years, and it's completely okay at that point to recognize their contributions, but not feel shy or guilty to have to go outside and say, you know what, like you did your part, man. Like it was incredible last 2 years, but like what brought me here is not what's going to take me forward. And I got to eyes wide open, think about now leveling up for a different set of skills versus what I was looking for initially. And you know what? Your company's evolved by that point. Your culture's evolved, the scale, the needs have evolved, and it's okay. Which kind of takes me to one other philosophical piece I have. I see a lot of people nickeling and diming on 10 basis points of equity here and there with early hires. And I say, look, one or two things is going to happen. If this person's horrible, they're not even going to last a year. You're going to get 100% of your equity back. They're reasonably good. They'll be there for 2 years and then you'll get 50% of it back. If they're amazing, every point of equity was well spent. So I think you have to think about wealth creation in the early days as a collective effort. Like you want these people, like, look, if you're getting the first sales hire 0.5%, if they last 4 years, they're pretty darn good and they set the trajectory of your company, and that's perfectly fine.
Varun, I guess, the kind of company building that was done in the, in the prior companies, Redlock, Cypher Cloud, and now, the eras were different. The capital availability was different. We spent a bit of time talking about hiring. What do you think are sort of other factors that is going to shape the way you choose to build Endor now, that maybe some of the learnings from the previous companies kind of translate well, but you got to have maybe new sort of strategies as you build in this era?
Yeah, so there's lots of differences, right? So let's take, for example, Endor Labs and Redlock. There's lots of differences in terms of Redlock was a market creation, right? We were creating this need and budget for security. With Endor Labs, our land in companies is around replacement of existing code scanning, application security testing tools. So it's a well-assigned budget. It's $600 million a year already being spent. So I have things to pull from. So when I'm thinking about like coverage, like when I have product market fit in Endor Labs, I'm scaling my go-to-market team much faster because I know the dollars are being spent, whether they're being spent with product A or B or C, it's being spent. And I want to take away that and move that spend to Endor by proving that we're a better product. So I have a coverage problem there, but I know that there's a market that exists. With Redlock, two things. One, I didn't have that much capital to go splurge and just go hire 10 people at a time. But two, we're creating a market and we didn't know how long it would take to create that market and the spend, right? And obviously, post the acquisition, that really validated the necessity for this spend. And suddenly, we went from single-digit millions to 100 million ARR in a year post-acquisition. But I think that was kind of one set of difference. I think there's also, security was certainly crowded in 2016. Security is a lot more crowded in 2023 because in the last 5 years, a lot of investment has gone into it. Now, I have one fundamental problem with this market, the way it's evolved. Previously, you actually had a good founder product fit and a concept. Today, people completely from outside of cybersecurity are coming in and starting companies. Like they might have built a CRM company before. Now they're building a cybersecurity company and they got funded. And so there's a lot of just saturation in the market. And that requires much more spend on like brand creation early if you're trying to go for something big, right? Recognition, brand, education. So I think that's another area that's different. Like most times, first-time cybersecurity founders will come to me to talk about, I'm not able to sell, or, this was hard. Like I underestimated how hard it is to sell. And I always tell people that you can have the best product, the most complex product solving the most complex advanced security problem, but you may find it hard to get past $1 million of ARR because in cybersecurity, as hard as it is to creating the best product, is to getting go-to-market right. And those things go hand in hand. And I think that's yes, like I'll recognize that I have an advantage over many first-time founders now because I've built go-to-market. I know what signals to look for, when to double down, when to pull back, and have the relationships and the credibility to go pick up the phone, call somebody, and chances are they'll pick up the phone. Because otherwise, it's super hard for first-time cybersecurity founders today.
Now, thanks for that. A lot of ways we can take this, but maybe two pointers. The first one being, I think there is a fundamental requirement, I would say, to be in the right place at the right time to tap on the right opportunity and execute on it, right? So everything needs to kind of come together. But this whole concept of threading the needle between experiences, market readiness, could you share a bit of your observations in the past 2 companies and this company? What advice would you give to founders, operators listening in about leveraging their own experiences and knowing that, okay, they are on the right track, that, maybe they're onto something here, that a company can be built?
One, don't do it alone. I always say, like, you got to round yourself up with at least 2 founders. Sometimes people find solace in like 4 co-founders. It's great. So one is like you want to have some validating signals, because one of the hardest things to be an entrepreneur, founder, CEO is it's pretty lonely. The buck stops with you, right? Like, you may make decisions that will haunt you for years to come, or they might be the best freaking decision you made, and you won't know it till many years later. So I think having more eyes on it, like, again, if you notice the theme initially when I was talking about like get more people's feedback, is like hire people that are smart around you. I have found that there's 2 sets of founders. One that recognize their weaknesses and hire for covering those weaknesses and bases. Others who potentially feel insecure to recognize that that's a weakness, and they will want to kind of figure out a way to not acknowledge that. And in fact, they will not find people that are better than that in that category because it makes secure. That's a big, big problem, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, for example, like go-to-market, and you think you got it and you miss some key signals. So having a well-rounded team, whether it's founders or just early folks, maybe even it's advisors, that can be good sounding boards to you, super critical. You need multidimensional signals, not a unidimensional signal. Other than that, look, there's something to be said about founder intuition. Like you're not going to have all the answers written down, but if you can reason with people, and maybe you disagree and you decide to go a different path, but even just having a conversation, it brings clarity to your thoughts, because ultimately you're going to have to take some data-driven decisions, but a fair bit of intuition-driven decisions. And you got to be able to trust your intuition, knowing fully well that you're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And that's okay. If your intuition works over 50% of the time, well, you'll be on the winning side of this, right? If you get it wrong, more wrong than right, then it's a different set of issues. So, I think it's a combination of having the right people around the table, listening to people, maybe not even if you're not listening to them, at least speaking out loud and seeing what feedback people give you, and ultimately, taking a combination of data and intuition-driven decisions. But make a decision. I've seen too many people. That's another thing I'll just add to this. I've seen too many people that will make a decision today and change it tomorrow. Like, hey, if you made a decision, sit it through. Like, let that experiment take place, right? The fickle-mindedness where you don't make a decision because you're not sure and you're unwilling to make a bet one way or the other. Like, go left or go right. Pick a direction, go. Worst case, you get it right or turn around. If you just stop your car, you're never making it to your destination. And so I think what frustrates your teams around you as a founder is if either you can't make a decision or you make a new decision every day. Like, both are problems.
There's again a lot of interesting nuggets there. But I want to pick on the topic that you mentioned. It's about how cyber has gotten more crowded over the years. How do you sort of in such a market, how do you sort of recommend to people, and how you guys are doing it around creating a differentiated value and communicating it to the right stakeholders?
I mean, first of all, is know your audience, right? Like, yeah, everybody will tell you in cyber, I'm building and selling to the CISO. Well, CISOs don't make decisions these days. CISOs are decentralizing, pushing more and more decision-making down the org. So understand who it is that the real influencers are in your organization. And 2, don't be annoying to them. Be educational and value additive to them. Like, you got to figure out I'll take my example with Endor Labs, right? Like what we focus heavily on is education, is kind of evangelism, is creating certifications for the market that are really accessible so people can understand the problem. Like, what is the new landscape of threat look like with our software? What is software supply chain? Can we get to a common understanding of what it is? People don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from their peers. My job is to just bring people together. We created this whole community called Lean AppSec, where it's by practitioners, for practitioners, Peloton and City and Docker practitioners coming and talking about these problems. So I think an education-driven sale is very important. If you look at even the changes that are going to be coming in the next new year with like email and how heavy-handed Google and Yahoo and others are going to be on like spam, like SDRs, and this whole model is going to change. Like just spamming people with emails, hoping for cold email response is not going to work. So how does a buyer bring affinity to you? One, they feel like you're actually teaching them something. Two, they feel like you're building a community that they want to belong in. Three, it's practitioner to practitioner. It's not you sharing that word, but somebody else communicating that to somebody else. So it's really basic principles. We often forget it because, we have these big pipeline goals and we want to go put a booth at RSA and scan 100 leads and expect that to turn into $2 million in pipeline. And it doesn't work that way. And the other piece around this is like, previously everybody's had this kind of attribution dilemma. Okay, my leads come from events, my leads come from SDRs, my deals come from somewhere else, partners. And it's a third, a third, a third. The world is not that clear cut anymore. It's multi-touch. You gotta, people have to be learning your content, and then they have to run into you at an event and see you and be like, oh, okay, I remember these people. They're doing some good stuff. Let me go talk to them. Oh, and the next week I was at a lunch with my partner, and my partner mentioned that this company is doing great, right? Like it's this multi-touch attribution that has to come into play. That's how this works. I think kind of single touch, I went here and then this led to this outcome, doesn't work anymore.
No, I think that you kind of perfectly teed up the conversation for us to talk about go-to-market, because I think that is the, product attributes aside, I think distribution is key, and then how do you get to that distribution is critical. From, again, gleaning from past experiences to current efforts, where would you think are there you're putting your dollars more in one aspect of go-to-market versus, the other? How have things changed for you?
I think you have to play the long game. This kind of goes back to what I was just starting out with. Like, hey, putting dollars on events and expecting events to turn into leads right away doesn't work that way. Or I'm going to have this campaign that's going to send 1,000 cold emails and I expect this. I think you've got to build a multi-touch systemic way of go-to-market. And that has to be technology partners, education, digital, SEO, resellers and VARs having this conversation. So you got to build a multi-touch platform. But look, that's not where you begin, right? The first thing you do is founder-led sales. Obviously, everybody can tell you that. So first thing is I'm trying to get confidence in saying, what is my sales pitch? What is my value proposition? And how do people decide if they're going to engage with me further? Once I've figured that out and I have repeatability, the point you want to get to is like, oh my God, like this thing is selling is taking up all my time. Like I don't have time as a CEO to run a company, build a product, focus on other things. So then you want to get help. The first question you have to ask in getting help is, do you hire an individual contributor, seller, or do you hire a head of sales? I again say the answer depends on you. Like if you feel comfortable understanding enough about building a sales organization to be dangerous, you want to hire a quota-carrying seller, 100% dedicated to that, and you'll kind of know how to ask them the right questions, measure progress, hire the right, solution architect and support structure to build this. If you're somebody who's an engineer before, never even thought about go-to-market, then maybe the answer is different. Maybe you need to bring a mid-level in career sales manager, ready, humble, hungry to get to potential head of sales, and you give them a whatever director of sales role and say, look, you got to be a player. You got to go get me X dollars in deals. But if you're successful and I see the right signs, you can start building this organization up and hopefully you can keep growing with me. The other piece that's a key part of my go-to-market thesis is you got to hire in twos. What I mean by hire in twos is not just a rep and an SE, but hire two different reps in two different territories with slightly different background, because you still don't know if somebody who's worked at Okta is going to be amazing for you, or somebody who's worked at the Series A startup that's grinded out for the last 2 years in this territory is going to be better for you. And maybe that other person hasn't sold identity. Maybe they sold endpoint security, but this person sold identity. And so you're trying to figure out the sales market fit of like, what is the seller profile, right? And the reason you want to do 2 versus 1 is you could end at a point where you end up where the seller is just not making progress. And is it going to convince you that you have the wrong product? And that's a detrimental place to be in, because if it's not the product problem, but you're made to believe it's a product problem, not a market problem, or not a individual's problem that they just can't sell it, you will pivot your company, and you'll pivot it based on one person not getting you the right signal or being incompetent in what they're supposed to do. Having 2 people, you're getting at least a fair share of signals for the market to say, okay, look, if both of them can't sell and they're both getting the same feedback in East and West, okay, I probably have a real problem. On the flip side, if one of my reps is kind of crushing quota, the other hasn't sold $1, I know where the problem is. It's not my product.
I think, I think that's a super, super interesting and very practical tactic that founders can take. Let me ask you I guess the devil's advocate question to that, which is, when you were working on Redlock, it was a cheaper environment, salaries were lower, channels were cheaper to spin up, whether it's paid or going to conferences, what have you. But it's gotten so expensive in these last few years. And yes, round size have gotten bigger, but is there something are there differences, or are there things that you have to change now as an early stage founder, given how expensive it's gotten to do distribution in today's environment?
100%. And so I kind of go back, throwing money at events and just saying it's going to work. Not going to work. I'm sorry. I can tell you now, save yourself a lot of money. You got to build a groundswell. You got to build the education. You got to build the connectivity with people to feel like you're a valuable asset. If you popped booth R400 in the third, lane of RSA and expect things to land into you, it's not going to happen. And so you got to be much smarter about this. Events, for example, are places where you meet people you're already engaging with because they all happen to be there and further your conversation. That's one. The other is like cold emailing, right? Like it's very rare that you will get a response. Now, people are starting to get really smart and be heavily customized. Like I think the SDRs that are doing really well are using the ChatGPT and customizing things specific to, oh, Vignesh, I heard this podcast. You were talking to Varun about ABC. Here, let me tell you something that's related to that. You know what? I spend time understanding you, understanding what you care about. That works. I feel like cold calling is actually not dead. So believe it or not, cold calling works. It's just a lot of people don't want a cold call, but the ones that do will do reasonably well. Investing in partner relationships earlier are things that will work. Small events that you do, intimate 5-person, 7-person events, quality people around the table wanting to have a conversation will work. You write a $10,000 check to a partner at a Taylor Swift concert to show up at their suite, probably not going to work. But you just got to figure it out. You got to figure out what works for you in your business. But you're right. The old tactics don't work, right? And it has to be value creation and education.
I want to talk about actually maybe one of the old tactics that might work now. And it actually goes back to your other comment on, how Palo Alto was so successful at pushing the, Redlock and Prisma product through their channels is the channels and spinning up channels. And, I'm sure, you're thinking about this very deeply at Endor. And I know you thought about this a lot at Redlock as well. What is practical advice that you can give to founders to actually spin up a channel? Because it's really hard to do right. And it takes a long time. And especially in the world of early stage startups, like you don't really have all the time to necessarily bear the fruit of the channel and doing it well. So how would you suggest founders go about that?
Look, lots to unpack there. One, 2 channel partners are not the same, right? You got national level VARs. They're too big for you as a startup, frankly. There's a kind of 5 people in a territory in the San Francisco area, 5 reps for a small, partner that walk the halls of 25 accounts. Chances are you'll get an audience with them before you get it with a national partner. But you got to recognize something. Just like there's 5,000 cybersecurity companies hounding on the doors of end customers, They're doing the same for partners, because this is not a secret anymore that you got to go build a channel. So I think there's a couple of things. One, partners want to make sure you're committed to the channel. Like, you're not using them to get to some scale and then you're going to throw them off to the side and kind of go do direct deals. So one, how do you build trust that your programs are meant to be fair and consistent with the channel? And you know what? As a founder, it pains you to say on every deal, I'm going to give 10 to 20% to some partner. Why would I do that? Well, you got to think long-term. Why are you doing that? And is that right to your business? Do you need to do that? The other piece is, people often said, well, I signed this reseller agreement with this person, but I never got deals. And I asked the question back. I said, what did you do for them? Right? Because value creation is a two-way street. You want them to pay attention to you when there's 5,000 companies. How are you getting their attention? Well, guess what? How I'm getting their attention is I just got a brand new logo to that, because my sales team went and worked through this and found this customer and went through this relationship. And, now we're coming to procurement and we think, let's go bring this partner in, because if we give them one, hopefully they'll give me one back. And hopefully we'll do a third one together. But that's what these relationships are. A lot of people don't have that perspective. They're like, oh, I'm here, I have paper with this partner. Where are my deals? Why would they bring you to the deals? Like, you haven't done anything for them yet. And so, and you got to remember, they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business with the larger companies. Like, let's say you're a Palo Alto Networks competitor. Palo Alto is taking hundreds of millions of dollars of your business through that. You're coming in them saying, hey, I'm going to beat Palo Alto Networks. What's my incentive as a partner to change, right? Like, you can look at it as one or two ways. One, you can convince them that if they don't do it, somebody else will, and they're going to be left behind. Or B, that truly there's differentiated technology here that is the right thing for them to take to their customer. So you got to treat the partners like a customer. You got to invest in those relationships. You got to give them before you expect to get something in return. And so that's the resellers. Then there's the SIs, GSIs. Look, again, the question is, what is natural to your product? Not every product fits the channel. Not every product fits the GSIs. But, let's say you have a product that is very services heavy. And the question is, do you need to build a whole services army to do that? Or, bring in the Deloitte's, KPMG's, Accentures of the world and say, you know what? I'm building this product. It's game changing, but it requires a certain lift in the customer. And we think that for every dollar in product revenue we get, you can get $5 in services revenue. That's just the architecture of a product. Great. That's probably a good conversation to have with the GSIs, because the GSIs are not interested in reselling. So I think you got to have somebody in your team who understands the channel nuances, and, either advisors or investors, or you hire somebody to do that, but really think about this pragmatic.
Thanks for that, Varun. I guess it kind of completely aligns with former board experiences, whereby you got to treat your partners as customers, because I think there's a lot of enablement that goes in. How do you think about, I want to bring in the cloud marketplaces, right? Let's not name any names. How would you recommend folks trying to figure out, okay, is A better, M better, or somebody else is better? How do you,
A, M, or G?
have you guys?
Again, goes back to what is the product you're building, who's your customer, and what are you doing? Listen, if you're building a cloud security product, helping people secure their AWS, Azure, and GCP environments, just chances are you're selling to somebody who's investing and committing a lot of dollars to these marketplaces. So you have a logical place. Let's say you're building a product that's endpoint security for on-prem. Maybe it's not logically connected to that business. There's two things to understand. Again, my philosophical observation that putting your listing on the marketplace will get you nothing. You got to work to enable those reps, figure out what you're doing. The one piece that I think you can be really smart about is a lot of customers commit large amounts of dollars to these large cloud providers. And, as part of these commits, those customers have the ability to spend on marketplace products. And I'd say that one of the biggest valuable creative mechanisms is to allow your customer to transact there, because they have overcommitted a certain amount of spend in the cloud and they're not meeting it. But if they can fulfill through that marketplace, they get to draw down on those commits. Now, again, if my buyer is the same person who's making those commitments to the cloud providers, easy. But if, engineering committed to the cloud and you're trying to sell to sales operations a product, there's no connected. Why would your engineering leader want to spend their dollars, their budget for something else. So again, what are you selling? Who are you selling it to? And what is the alignment? And how are you going to enable this fulfillment business to actually bring you revenue? And by the way, are you a pay-as-you-go product or are you a contract-based product? Because the cloud marketplace also delineate on transaction through pay-as-you-go versus contracts.
That's super helpful. Varun, we're pretty deep in the podcast right now, and just being conscious of time, I wanted to make sure that we save enough time for the really interesting story, which is the M&A story around Redlock, and obviously how you think about that, and especially in this environment, I think it's going to be really helpful for founders and operators as they think about what's next for them. Maybe in if you can just give us the story. I know there was a certain competitor that was acquired by Palo Alto. For you to even go and take a call from Palo Alto is a pretty crazy thing. I know you were navigating a fundraise in the middle of all of it. Maybe you could just walk us through the story of how those last few months at Redlock ended up, and then we can jump into the details of how you made the decision and why you made it.
Yeah, I'll give you the short of it because we can speak for hours about this. Look, Palo Alto Networks had just bought our biggest competitor in the market. Shortly thereafter, they had a leadership change and a new CEO, Nikesh Arora, came in and Mark McLaughlin retired. And, like you said, like Live Sunky Dory, they're now Palo Alto is our biggest competitor. And, we start systemically leveraging the opportunity where, this company they bought and with Palo Alto getting integrated, we're losing some of the focus on customers. And we systemically targeted that, and we were acquiring more and more customers along the way. My guess is somewhere along the way, somebody internally at Palo Alto Networks said, these guys at Redlock keep eating our lunch. And I think at the same time, the other thing that was happening was Nikesh, coming in from Google, really like a kind of student of the business. He knew the writings on the wall that cloud is going to take a lot of dollars away from the network security business. And so he made the bold decision to say Palo Alto Networks is going to be the number one cloud security company. And what do we need to go deliver on that vision? So one, you needed multi-cloud capabilities. Evident, the product that was bought for was predominantly AWS, and we had multi-cloud. And the other piece was that they wanted a strong foundation on which they could build and invest in winning that capability and a team that knew what they were doing. And so I think the combination of that things led to them reaching out. But like you said, I was skeptical. The corp dev team wanted to meet, and I said, no, I'm not meeting corp dev. And then they said, well, would you meet our new CEO? And so, I agreed to an informal meeting and with Nikesh, and we had a coffee in the Rosewood and chatted about life and other things. And, long story short, he asked me, what do I want to do? And I said, we're in the midst of, we're just closing a round of financing. And, we talked about some timelines, and this was on a Wednesday we met. And he's like, well, can I bring my team in and can we have a discussion? And long story short, on Friday, the Palo Alto leadership team all came to our co-working facility at Spaces Menlo Park, and we closed the curtains in a room because there was heavy-hitting leaders there sitting with us, and we didn't want the world to know what's going on. And we had a deep dive conversation for a couple of hours. And by Sunday night, we had our first LOI in our hands. And the reason this kind of moved quickly was because we had a round that was going to close on Tuesday. And so by Monday night, we basically finalized the numbers and agreed on what it was going to be. And I think for me, it was clarity of vision from Nikesh to say, look, I want this thing to be big. I understand that this motion is different from our network security motion. We're going to let you be. We're going to give you oxygen. We're going to let you kind of run as a separate business unit. For the first time ever within Palo Alto Networks was the creation of this speed mode of Prisma Cloud. Eventually that was called. And, the rest is history, because from there on, we acquired 7, 8 other companies and integrated into a massive portfolio. And every 6 months, we had a newly integrated acquired product. And we said this is a great time to capitalize on this market because people haven't yet gone and bought 100 different products for cloud security. They will if we don't do something about it. And so we consolidated various critical areas of cloud security into a singular platform and made it scale efficiently.
There's lots of things to talk about here, but maybe first things first, we can start with the one comment you made, which was you had a round about to close on Tuesday when you made the decision on the Sunday. For a lot of founders, raising the Series B is, one of the hardest things they'll do. And the fact that you had it and you hadn't have just walk us through the decision. Like why when you had the money in the bank, you had this vision for building, really great cloud security business. Obviously, we've seen how well Prisma Cloud has done as a part of Palo Alto. Maybe just walk us through the decision behind why you decided to go with Palo Alto at that point.
Yeah, great question. I think there's multiple things, right? One is you look at in a lot of cybersecurity in particular, but larger companies, there's a point where you can sell at a technology and strategic model. And then you kind of get past 10, 15 million ARR. Now you're going to grind it out to build a 100 million ARR company, or you're getting an ARR multiple. And going back to the go-to-market discussion we just had, you might have the best product. The investment it takes to build go-to-market, to out-execute your competitors in a very noisy market is substantive, right? Like the amount of dollars I would need. If I went down the Series B, that wouldn't be the last round we would be doing. So we'd be doing a B and a C and a D. The third thing as a founder you think about is like, what's my vision, right? Here's my baby. What would make me most proud about this? Like at the end of the day, whether I do it individually as a standalone business or I have a higher success rate and odds of building something much bigger, much faster with a big brother overseeing, what is better for me and my team, right? And ultimately, like you look at it from an individual wealth creation perspective, you look at it from a wealth creation for all the employees of it involved, how life-changing that's going to be. And from a perspective of your investors and say, well, what's the right decision? And I think if you look at it from we did this time value analysis and we said, if Nikesh didn't convince us that this wouldn't be a Cisco-like acquisition where we would just go there and 2 years later we would all leave and nothing would come out of the product, I don't think we would have done it. I think it was his convincing us that this was part of a bigger mission and a vision, and we would get to be at the helm of it, lead it, and build it, and have the wealth creation event that happened for everybody, not founders, every employee in the company. And goes back to like where I said, share the wealth. When you're building a successful company, don't be penny wise, pound foolish. Get people to be part of this journey and excitement and winning if you win. I think it was a life-changing event for everybody, every single employee in the company.
Again, we're in a lot of nuggets there. I think one critical element, especially when you're doing a venture-backed company, you have multiple stakeholders, and board is one. You have investors, you have insiders, your employees. How did you navigate in your own head and then communicate in terms of the value that is being created for everybody, and that this is what we should be doing right now, instead of maybe taking that Series B check, for example?
Look, I think part of this goes back to how do you pick your investors? How do you pick your board members? But I think part of it is like, look, we were aligned from day one. And, not once did Mark from Sierra or Deepak from Dell come and say, no, like, we think you're wrong. They said, look, it's your blood, sweat, and tears. We'll be rich one way or the other at the end of the day, and it'll be a great return for our fund. But it's your blood, sweat, and tears. We will support what you want to do. Not every VC will say that, but, they really took at it from our perspective and said, look, you know what's best for the market, for your business, for you individually, and for your employees. And you go make that decision. And they kind of gave us counseling and feedback when we asked for it, but by no means did they add it. You're already in a lot of pressure when you're in this situation. You're negotiating hard. The buyer, people are threatening around, look, if you don't do this, we'll crush you because we'll Palo Alto Networks, you round looming, lots of things you're managing. And the last thing you want is further pressure from your own board on this. And I think we had an incredibly amazing, supportive board that gave us the freedom to make that decision on our own. And, for us, we just gave the reasons that I just gave you about why we thought it was a wise choice. And, people ask me, like, do you regret when you sold? And I said, no, I actually don't, because the outcome before is good. Like, we can be greedy and say, look, we would have made 10 times more money if we stayed alone. Yeah, that's fine. But who knows, right? There could have been 10 times more risks in that journey. And, who else knows what could have happened along the way? You would have diluted yourself in 4 other rounds, and then this market conditions would have been happening. Even if we're 100 million ARR today, we wouldn't be going public. So, you kind of get in these conundrums. And I say, look, I don't think I regret that decision at all. And in fact, there was a great learning from Palo Alto Networks for me that I hope to apply in this journey.
That's super helpful, Varun. And I think as we talk about this journey, we would be remiss if we didn't give you a chance to let you talk about Endor and maybe some of the learnings. I know it's still early there, but Maybe first things first, just if you can give everybody a little bit of color on what is Endor, what are you guys working on, and what is the vision and the mission there?
Yeah, look, software development is radically evolving, right? 5 years ago, our developers wrote most of the code for our applications themselves. Today, 80 to 90% of that code comes from complete strangers on the internet in this open source ethos. The way the whole open source ecosystem works, developer wants to build a new feature. The first thing they do is they Google around, see what pieces of code they can reuse. We have no idea who wrote that code, no warranties, no SLAs, no contracts. We bring it in, we start using it. And over time, you have hundreds and thousands of these little components of code that compose your application. And in the future, a lot of this will not just be open source, but it'll be actually generated by AI, which is learning on open source code anyway. So like your reliance on this code that your developers don't write is growing massively. And we just don't have the guardrails in place to understand what's happening. And the problem is attackers are smart. Like, where there are very mature controls around network security and identity and endpoint security, me as an attacker looking for the easiest entry point into an enterprise. And you're not paying attention to your software supply chain. Your developers can go on the internet, get anybody's code. So my job as an attacker is to fool you to use my code. And once I'm in there, I can do all kinds of interesting things in your environment. I can weaponize your own software against your employees, your customers. That, in essence, is this whole idea of software supply chain security. And so Endor Labs focuses on that. Like, we think that developers should harness the productivity and the value of open source, but do it responsibly, where the enterprise has the right guardrails to validate what you're bringing in a very automated, transparent fashion in your pipeline. And at the same time, reduce the noise. Like, the biggest thing that's causing this friction between security and developers today is developers think security don't understand how software development works. And moreover, they don't think the tools that security teams use understand how software development in the modern era works. And so we want to bridge that gap. So we're building tools that are highly targeted, accurate, right? That cut back 70, 80, 90% of the noise of the current generation of code scanning tools. And we're bringing more visibility into the pipelines through which all of your code traverses from a developer's laptop to eventually being in the cloud. So, just to kind of sum it up, we talk about this whole journey, and like my Redlock journey has been all focused on, you're ready to deploy something, it's a container, now it's in the cloud. Now it's much farther left of that. As you're developing code and you're building your software, going through your CI/CD pipeline, like, how do you focus on the security there?
Got it. Super helpful background. I'm going to maybe ask you a slightly hard question now, which is the fundraise you've done with Endor so far. I mean, it's almost definitely way bigger than the amount of money you've ever raised at Redlock, and almost halfway the size of the Redlock exit. You've talked a little bit about a lot about sharing the wealth and making sure you're not pound wise, penny foolish, making sure you take the right sorts of risk. It feels like this is a very big swing and hence probably a little bit more risk. I have two questions. One, how did you decide, or what kind of gave you the confidence that this was the time to make a big swing, number one? And number two, does it change the profile of the people or the culture that you're building, given that you're taking taking more risk and taking such a big swing with this opportunity?
Yeah. Look, I'm blessed to have the support and confidence of investors who felt it was appropriate to give me the kind of money that they did to build something. I think obviously there's a very large opportunity in front of us. Like I said, this is also a replacement market. So for people, it's a great understanding and marker of kind of like what Wiz has done to Prisma Cloud. I have an opportunity to do that, in my case, to Sneak, right? And so I think people are saying, look, there's a company there that's valued at 7 billion. And, here are the things they did well, and here are the things they did wrong. If somebody can come in and take the learnings from there and execute better and faster and more artfully, what does that mean in terms of the opportunity? Can this be a 2, 5, 7, $10 billion company? And if you can believe that thesis, then, $70 million raised is acceptable. So I think that's one. That would be to the market opportunity. Certainly, I feel the pressure. They are betting on the team to say they can do it and have the chops of execution and the early signals around what we are able to do. Now, as it comes down to your question around has it changed some of my core beliefs or strategies in company building? I would say no, right? I'm still hiring for the hungry and humble. I'm still building this co-development side of US and India. But yeah, I'm taking certain bigger risks, faster. I'm iterating through it faster because I feel like there's a market opportunity ahead of me. There's a time and window. I got to go do it. And, hopefully in hindsight, we'll see in a few years from now, ask me how well it worked out. But that's the plan. That's the strategy here.
Got it. Maybe one last question before we end with our famous, or at least famous to me and Arvind, Decompress section. Talk a bit about how you see the cybersecurity market evolving over the next few years. I think we're at a pretty interesting time. I mean, from when I first joined venture and when you were first starting Redlock, I mean, there were probably maybe 2 or 3 big security players out there at the time. It feels like the market's really, really consolidated. And we were having this interesting debate the other day as to who is the biggest security threat to Palo Alto. It might be Vista or TPG or one of the PE guys today, given the rollouts that are happening. So I'm curious, what are your views on where does cyber end up? Is there an opportunity for another Palo Alto kind of competitor? Do you see this market being dominated by rollups? Like, how do you see the next maybe 5 to 10 years in this market?
Yeah, look, there's certainly Palo Alto's done exceedingly well, and I'm a very proud shareholder of that company and will continue to be. I think Microsoft has a tremendous opportunity in front of us. Like, if you think about the market, right, there's a lot of companies that used to be potential cyber acquirers, from Symantec, now VMware, others that have kind of, disappeared. But if you look at the new gen of companies, I think cloud platforms are going to be certainly a big one. And then, like you said, PE firms are consolidating earlier sized companies around some of the core foundational acquisitions they've made. That said, yeah, look, in cybersecurity, there's I don't know what the stats are, but probably 1 in 5,000, 3,000 that go public. So that's a big swing in what eventually makes it there. I see the cybersecurity landscape as kind of in its second generation. So like first generation, which is cybersecurity tools focused on compliance. The second generation was cybersecurity tools that didn't suck as much for developers, like they were tolerable for developers, right? I would put like Sneak in that category, Waze and others. And I think the third generation of tools are going to be tools that not only suck less, but they actually deliver value and productivity to engineers. So they do more than just security. They're really focused on like elements of developer tool, developer productivity, and security, which truly gives you that DevSecOps kind of, the nirvana state that we've all been hoping for and working on for many years. I also think application security has been underserved. I mean, if you look at it, how many large application security exits heard over the years? Barracuda was probably the Latin Perva. Barracuda, 2 kind of companies that were public or are public. But besides that, like there's a lot of pent-up demand. If you look at Forrester data, they will say, and Gartner data, like application security is now almost as fast growing or second to cloud security. So I think it's having its final moment. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity, but yeah, like there's certainly not opportunity for 5,000 companies. So many will vanish over the next 24 or 36 months. And many smaller consolidations will continue to happen, which is good for the industry, and fewer platform vendors will emerge. And, that will require capitalization to a certain scale and execution to a certain scale.
Well, me coming in here at the tail end here, we are pretty much at the end of the session. And, these are fun questions. This is the section where we termed it the Decompress section. But there is a thoughtful one here. It's about how do you know as a founder, you have sort of reached the pinnacle of your mission when you're done with your mission? Do you give yourself certain guardrails and sort of, checkposts to see that you're, getting there? And sometimes it's continue with the journey or bring another person to run the journey for you. Any color there will be helpful.
Yeah, great question. Look, I don't think you can ever start with the end state in mind. I think none of us can predict what that is. I couldn't tell you, is Endor going to go public? Of course, I would love to say it will, but I'd be lying to you in your face if I said I can guarantee you that's what's going to happen. Nobody knows. Is it going to be built for 10 years, 5 years, 7 years? I couldn't tell you. I think that the question is, you're on a mission. My focus is to build a legacy of a company that will be here for years and years to come, just like Prisma Cloud has become in cloud security. And, you want to look back many years later and say you built something great, not because of how much money it made you, but because it really solves some meaningful challenges for the industry, right? Like Prisma Cloud has helped accelerate the movement to the cloud. Endor Labs will help overcome software supply chain challenges and embrace open source and AI and other, pivots in software development lifecycle. Yeah. So like, there are people who ask me like, how should I think about getting acquired? And I say, you can't really plan to get acquired. There's a few things you could do, but as design, your focus needs to be build a company that's really sustainable, financially viable for the long term. And if good things happen along the way, they will. But if you try to take shortcuts because I want to sell next year, it's not in your control. As it relates to like, as a leader, knowing when, if you continue to be the right person to lead the organization, God, I've seen it from the outside. I will say there's a couple of things. Goes back to that conversation I had earlier about like being secure in what your strengths are and also what your weaknesses are. If you're insecure, you're going to try to kind of put a lipstick on the pig and a bow on this package, which doesn't bode well. At some point, your investors will see through it. You're gonna get exposed, if I want to call it that. And so I think, A, try to build a team around you that's rock solid, that helps you kind of achieve some of those or at least overcome the weaknesses you have. But B, if you have those people and you're getting in their way constantly, then there's going to be a problem. Then you have to either recognize that, look, your time has come to step aside, or your board's going to figure out that your time's come to step aside. But none of us as founders know it all. Like, let's be honest, right? And just understanding that and acknowledging that and saying, then how do I design an org to be successful? Depends on you personally. And if you're going to get in the way of succeeding because it becomes personal to you to just hold on to a seat, or are you truly the right leader for the organization and to build the right culture that scales over years to come?
No, thanks for that. And I guess this is a fun one. So how do you, this is a tough journey for founders. How do you sort of mentally recharge yourself? Any tips that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, look, I've been married for 11 years, with the same partner for 14 years. So the fact that she's very understanding for what my days are like and my journey is, and me just coming home and, being a silly, goofy guy that wants to forget about being a CEO during the day helps, right? Just the way I recharge is a lot of family time. I am kind of an ambivert. So like with being a CEO, like I'm doing conversations all day long. Sometimes when I come home, I just want to kind of get in my bed, watch Netflix with my wife and hang out with the kids and all. That's all I want to do sometimes. And she's very supportive of that. And I try to compartmentalize at least Saturdays to be no work days. Sunday is always trying to catch up for what's going to happen in the week, but Saturday tends to be a little bit of a low profile day for me. And the other thing is compartmentalizing my day. Because, guess what? Work doesn't end at 5 o'clock, but you know what? I have kids who are 3 years old and I don't want to regret several years from now that I didn't see them for bedtime or have dinner with them. So, I'm home, believe it or not, around 5:30, but then I'm with them till 8:39, with my wife till 10, and then I'll work from 10 to 11:30, 12, whatever I need to burn the midnight oil to catch up before I go to bed. But compartmentalizing your life, and there's no balance, but integration of work life is really critical.
Maybe one last question for you, Varun, and I think in this world and in kind of the types of lives we lead, unfortunately, taking days off. I mean, I definitely am guilty of this, but you can feel a little bit guilty. You're like, hey, I just took Saturday as it was a chill day, laid back day, and you feel like you didn't do anything. Obviously, I think the comments and the points that you made about not having any regrets about not spending time with family is so important. But I'm curious, how do you manage and balance balance it with your team, right? I mean, just being like, how do you communicate with them that like, hey, it's okay to take time off. It's okay to mentally recharge, while also making sure they put in the right kinds of effort when it needs to happen.
Look, I think you somewhat have to lead by example. Actually, one of the things we have done internally here is we have written user manuals. Like every functional leader has written their personal user manual, user guide. And so we've talked about in our guides available to our whole company. How do we work? How do we communicate? How do we recharge? When is our downtime? How do we like to be when we're on vacation? And so everybody kind of understands each other's way. And we're all human. We have different ways of recharging. And the other thing is, look, I'm not shy to tell my team, hey, I'm taking the kids out to Hawaii for the week and I'll be out Monday through Friday. I'll check my phone. If you have something urgent, I will, but I'm going to try to take some downtime. And you know what? If I'm doing it as a leader, it's perfectly acceptable for them to do it as well. So I think, you want to create the right kind of culture and lead by example and, respect that all of us are different in the way we behave, the way we work, the way we communicate, and lay it out on the table. So I know, and I can read. How does my VP of product like to communicate and absorb information and take feedback? Versus how does my VP of sales like to do that? We've written it up. And so all of our teams know they're communicating with us, if they're hearing from us. If I'm sending a Slack at 10 o'clock at night, I don't expect you to respond to me at 10 o'clock at night. I'm just sending it because that's a convenient time for me to send it to you.
Well, walk the talk and talk the walk. I mean, that's pretty much the summary of that, and that's very helpful, Varun.
Yeah.
We're pretty much at the end of the time here, and I think there's a lot of details that you went into, tactics that I'm sure the founders, operators listening in would appreciate. So thank you once again from us to coming on to the Unpiped podcast.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks again.